only of COVID-19, but also of the Russia-Ukraine war spillover?
Thank you, Arnold, and thank you for having me in this very interesting Twitter space. So indeed, Ukraine is, I don't know how many thousands of kilometers from Rwanda. So maybe we wouldn't expect such a crisis or war to affect us, but I believe most Rwandans have felt this in their pocket because of the mainly energy inflation that is a result of the war. But I think we are really dealing with two crises. First one is the food crisis, and this has nothing to do with Ukraine. It has everything to do maybe with climate change, but with definitely with bad rains. And you know, when you look at the inflation numbers and even the way the inflation is calculated, I think over 25% of the weight of food and non-alcoholic beverages is over 25%. So anything that affects food prices really has an impact on inflation numbers. And that's why probably all prices have increased. So I feel we are dealing with two crises. And the Ukraine war has added, you know, an energy crisis on top of an existing food crisis, and this has compounded the effects. And that's why now in Kigali, because food has to be transported from the rural areas to Kigali, and because transport is being heavily affected, that's why we have the high prices. Now, what we are doing, look, it's easy. When we have a crisis such as this one, and energy prices, all prices in particular, you know, increase by, let's say, 10 or 20%, this means that for our oil marketing and our oil importers companies, if they want to import the same quantity, they need more money. It is as simple as that. You know, if they were importing, I don't know how many, you know, cubic meters of oil, for them to be able to satisfy the demand, they will need more money just because the prices have increased. So what we've done is to increase the working capital facilities that these companies have with banks, because we wanted them, you know, we did not want Rwanda to face an energy crisis that we've seen in other countries, where people would queue for some for days at a pump for them to be able to fuel their vehicles. And I think many people who are listening to us have not seen that happening in Rwanda, because we have very effective energy reserves, and banks were able to respond and facilitate all importers for them to have enough stocks in the country to be able to service the demand. So that's one thing that we've done. Now, when it comes to food prices, unfortunately, agriculture remains very underfunded by bank. I think by banks in general, I think we have less than 6% of bank financing going to agriculture, and this obviously is you know, in the nature not to support agriculture production. And I believe as banks we need to look at, you know, ourselves seriously, and if we really want to support our country build resilience, we need to see how not only we mitigate effects of climate change, but we also pour more funding to agriculture, so that, you know, we need to have food reserves, just like we have oil reserves covering a couple of months in case there's a disruption in the markets. We need to have food reserves for, staple crops like beans, maize, etc. These are crops that people need for their daily livelihoods. We need to be able to have enough reserves, because we all agree that this decade is going to be marked by crisis. You know, we just are coming from the COVID crisis, entering a new crisis. Most people believe that, we are not going to rest. There'll be a crisis after another. And as a sector, we need to build a strong resilience so we can support the country to also build resilience. So that's what I can say. Maybe if there are some of our clients that are participating to this Twitter space, some of them who do international transfers have been affected simply because of the heavy sanctions put on Russian companies. So it's not because of us, because we do legit transactions, international transactions through SWIFT. But our correspondent banks have been overwhelmed because when you have new sanctions, and I don't think they've hired more staff, some of the transactions that banks locally would send through these correspondent banks would be, would meet a queue of many transactions that need to be cleared by the correspondent banks. And we've seen the turnaround time, go sometimes for weeks before an international transfer is effected. So we've been engaging, obviously, banks, telling them that we need, we do legit business and we need our clients not to be affected. But we also have been engaging our clients to tell them, if you want to do a transfer, you need to do it in advance because it might delay for days or weeks. So that's why we're trying to tell our clients to be a bit more prudent and make the transfers in time. So I think that's what I can say. All in all, we need to keep building resilience in our economy. Something maybe I can add is when you look at bank financing this year, many banks have benefited from the ERF2, which is supporting companies in manufacturing. And again, this is the nature of this funding is to support import substitution, to have our manufacturing companies expand their capacities to be able to produce more. So we can substitute whatever was coming from abroad, and this is also building resilience. So what we are doing as banks is to continue building resilience of our economy. We have strong balance sheets, we have strong capitalization, and we believe because of that we'll be able to support government efforts, but also the private sector efforts to continue building resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Diane. Wow, there was a look of a very empty glass, not even half empty, for those remarks regarding the beginning of the decade. And I just want to keep with you there when you talked about support for the different sectors. And I want to correlate this with something the Deputy Governor hinted on and also Ferdinand touched. Which was regarding what is known as the central bank rate, in other places, repo rate, or Fed Reserve rate, depending on where you get your news from. Rwanda's central bank increased that to 6.5%, largely to reduce inflationary pressures. Now, that was in line with the previous hikes. So, what is the current trend in lending rates, and how is the recent decision by BNR going to impact the current interest rates we see from some of your members, the different commercial banks?
Thank you, Arnold. Obviously, when rates increase, the key repo rates, in this case of the central bank, but also the rates globally have been increasing significantly. This increases the costs of funding for banks. As we know, we get our funding from depositors, some of us from interbank markets. We also get our funding, some banks from lines of credit from typically development finance institutions. And the cost has been increasing. So what we've been doing, and many banks have revised their base rates, which is sort of the minimum rate at which they extend loans to clients. These base rates have been increasing. But again, we want to be conscious that if we increase significantly lending rates in a very turbulent period where there's a lot of uncertainty, it will just come back to us in terms of increasing of credit risk and NPLs. So the trend of lending rates has not followed, as I think the central bank has not followed and has not increased in the same line as the central bank rate. But you expect rates to increase if these rates are not reduced at some point. And I think what the central bank is trying to do is to reduce inflation. We hope that these actions by the central bank are going to indeed reduce inflation. And in that case, banks won't need to increase rates. Now, the problem is we also finance ourselves from facilities mainly in US dollars, and the dollar rates have increased significantly. So when a bank releases their financials, you'll all see that the cost of funds is increasing, that the margins are being squeezed, and as much as most banks do not want to replicate this cost to clients now, I think if the situation continues, most banks will seriously think of revising the lending rates upwards, which of course we believe is not a good thing. So we really hope that we'll start seeing inflation reducing. I think the latest number was 20%, so October. We are hoping that now that the rains are better, although the season A did not start in a good position, we really hope that we'll see this inflation number coming back to maybe not immediately to single digit, but to 10 to 12%, and banks won't need to increase their rates. Thank you.
Thank you. Picture there pretty well, and also open the can of worms so I can see some of you already requesting to ask a few questions. I want to encourage for those that don't want to take up the microphone to ask those questions, you can use the hashtag Twitter Spaces with NDR. We'll be able to comment in a few there, and we'll be jumping into them. If then you could also send us messages directly to our DMs, also direct messages, there and share those questions with our panel of experts. Bringing the Deputy Governor back into the conversation, it has been mentioned by the other panelists regarding different sectors, different as Ferdinand mentioned, that lead to the decision making there. But at this point, would you say our financial sector is at a position to remain resilient under adverse economic scenarios? And Dr. Diane said, in the better part of this decade, we may be having a crisis after crisis. So, for instance, worsening of geopolitical tensions observed? And if yes, could you please share some indicators of the resilience of the financial sector and what those can be attributed to?
Thank you very much, Arnold. I think to build on what Ferdinand has to the financial sector itself, we really reassured when we look at the current capital adequacy ratio, as he mentioned, to have banks, maybe to explain it, to have enough capital that if there was any shock or any losses, they can be able to absorb them without any risk to their stability. The second, also, this is what is being seen globally. Despite the heightened risk I talked about in my first intervention, the global banking system has so far remained resilient to the shocks. And I think this is, thanks to the lessons learned from the previous financial crisis in 2008, which led to the reform of banking regulation and ensuring that the banking system builds enough capital buffers for subsequent shocks, and this really has worked pretty well. Now, we are into still global challenges, but one probably light of hope is that we're seeing inflation levels globally peaking. And the projection that we had that will go back to inflation numbers that would be within the band that we have here in Rwanda of between 2% and 8% by the second half of 2023, we're seeing already signs that is possible if there are no other, I would say, surprises, especially when we look at the domestic agricultural production. Secondly, when we look at even the insurance sector, it's also very solvent, still profitable, and then the liquidity levels above the 100% ratio that is required. So the stability of banks, stability of insurance, and even on the microfinance institutions level, which is really a conduit for financial inclusion for us, the microfinancial institutions as a whole, they also adequately capitalized. So there are no concerns as far as we see on the major financial subsectors. But again, what we have learned this year is that while we had expected a full recovery of the economy in 2022, this Russia-Ukraine war came as another crisis. So that's why we remain vigilant as a central bank, as a supervisor of the financial sector, to any shock that might come that we might not be aware of. Because as mentioned, we cannot rule out that we're going to have crises that are more frequent than in the past. And there it's a challenge for us as supervisors, but also to the industry to build their resilience. And probably, something that might be considered more as a soft skill is how do we communicate and engage with the different stakeholders, with the Rwandan citizens on the impact of these crises on their own financial standing, on their everyday life. And this is why I think it's important to continue being very transparent on what we see as crisis, but also advising on probably some, I would say, financial discipline that's needed when we're in such crisis times. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. Now, open up the questions of some of your comments coming in at Nyiri. Let me see, at Nyiri Mafanga. Oh, interesting name. You have a comment right there for us. So please unmute your mic, ask a question, and your question or question two. Please, you have exactly 2 minutes max to ask that question.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to talk about in terms of diaspora. So, what's the role diaspora can play in this war of Ukraine and Russia? How can we? I want to know how the diaspora can help to reduce the inflation, because the more we send money, can this help to reduce the inflation? Yeah, this question goes to Soraya. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I didn't get the last part of the question.
The question was, what is the role the diaspora can play in helping curb the inflation pressures that are being felt in the country?
Thank you. That's a very good question, but also complex to answer. I think, first of all, we have to recognize that the diaspora's impact or contribution to different projects in the country do help, be it in times of high inflation or not. So that is something that we continue to appreciate as a country. The more they invest, and also through remittances, to assist in different, I would say, social activities or support, being families, that is appreciated. Now, where can we say that we have to be innovative as a country to continue attracting investment for diaspora? There has been talks of different investment vehicles that can be put in place that I think would be very much welcomed. There hasn't been yet probably, and I don't want to make an announcement, but this is something that we're still looking at. Secondly, when we look at the volume of remittances compared to pre-COVID levels, actually those have been going up. And one of the reasons why is probably not because income of diasporas have gone up, because we know all countries were affected by the pandemic and now the current crisis we're in, but the fact that, our payment systems and the digital payment systems has been efficient. So because of that convenience, because we're able to also capture data on financial remittances coming in the country, we see that also, contributes positively, not only on our balance of payment, but also to get more funds in the country. So probably, even though I'm a central banker, on a social note, we've seen, I think, different initiatives of diaspora, Rwandan communities abroad, contributing or assisting communities, especially in rural areas, to contribute to Mutual. And that's what we see as one of the social consequences of inflation, is that people are unable to really provide for their basic needs, including, health insurance. So probably, looking at that social support as well is one thing that alleviate the burden of citizens that are, who are grappling with meeting basic needs. We've talked about increase of prices of food, of energy. So if people have less room to really save or contribute to their health insurance, the fact that the Rwandan community abroad has been proactive in that matter is something to commend and to continue to encourage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General. I can see a question that I think depends of that coming in from a one at harmless 1Z Twitter handle. Two questions coming in from him. The first question goes to the governor, the deputy governor. International transfers are the highest in Rwanda compared to the rest of the East African Community region. Giving a simple example, world remit charges less than $1 in Uganda and yet it's $2.9. How can that be tackled? The second question goes to Dr. Diane Karusisi. How many of small medium enterprises loans have been approved and how many have been denied? I think Ferdinand hinted on that, and please, Ferdinand, feel free to jump in here as well. And what percentage was loaned, or of that was loaned to the large corporates? That question to Dr. Dan Karusisi. Deputy Governor, the first question, international transfers are the highest in Rwanda compared to the rest of the region. How can that be tackled?
Thank you very much, Arnold, and for the person that I didn't catch the name, unfortunately, that asked the question. Although I wouldn't say that any of the costs that we see on transfer of money or cross-border transaction would be is due to the Ukraine-Russia war. But however, as our mandate or supervisor of payment system, we do agree that costs for remittances towards our continent in general is very high. On a global basis, when we compare the cost of remittances to Africa, they're about at 8% of the amount, whereas in other parts of the world, like Latin America or Asia, they're already down to between 2 and 3%. And that is an issue. And basically, it's due to one, affordability of I would say the infrastructure, the cost of infrastructure, and secondly as well the number of providers. So the more we as a country promote fintech that in the payment space, the more we see that the cost is reducing gradually, and we're hoping that as Rwanda is really focused on creating an enabling business environment for fintech, of becoming a hub for fintechs, that will address really the cost issue that the person was referring to. But it's something that they continue to work on, and hoping that in a few years we'll see that not only Rwanda but Africa in general will have affordable transfers or remittances services. Thank you.
Thank you there, Dr. Thank you there, Deputy Governor. Dr. Diane Karusisi, how many of SMEs loans have been approved and how many have been denied? I think the gentleman is looking for the ratios there. And what percentage was loaned to large corporates?
Thank you for the question. I think all banks have quite aggressive targets in terms of SME lending. So I don't have the aggregate numbers. Maybe Ferdinand can help here. But generally, when you look at the new loans that are approved, generally 50% goes to large companies, large corporates, and 50% goes to SME and retail. So it's half-half generally. But again, these are the volumes. But because SMEs get lower amounts, we have more companies that access loans. And I can tell you also, when we look at the ERF2, that scheme mainly for manufacturing companies, we've seen many SMEs accessing these loans, companies that are in the manufacturing sector, but also many companies have accessed working capital facilities at a subsidized of 8%. So I don't have the numbers. Maybe Ferdinand can help. But generally, it's 50-50 to the large corporates and the other 50% to SMEs and retail. Thank you.
Ferdinand, you've been throwing the ball. Any luck with those numbers? What ratios, especially on the denied side?
Yeah, thank you very much, Arno. Looking at the numbers as at September this year, you find that large corporates, actually the corporates get more loans at to the tune of 60% compared to the individuals who get around 40%. That's in terms of value of the loans. Looking again to the rejection rate, our survey for this period showed us that the rejection has been on decline. Rejection was around 18% compared to 22% during COVID period. So you find that the rejection has been on the decline this period around. Thank you.
Thank you. There for now. More questions coming in. Wow, guys. There's another question there coming into the Deputy Governor. Is the National Bank of Rwanda considering continue raising policy interest rate to combat inflation? And if yes, to what extent? Another question coming in is banks and this I think goes to Dr. Diane Karusisi. Banks and telecommunication companies were the most profitable industries over the COVID-19 period. Can they do more in terms of supporting businesses and recovery of certain sectors? Those two questions. We'll start with you, Deputy Governor.
Yes or no. On the question on whether the bank intends or not to continue raising the central bank rate, I don't think we would have an answer now. This year, the central bank has already raised its central bank rate by 2%. It was 4.5 before February, and then we've increased it now to 6.5 the last 50 basis points, so 0.5% increase was as a decision of the Monetary Policy Committee in November. And again, what we're doing as central bank is to continue monitor how inflation how inflation is either increasing or decreasing. We have quarterly meetings, and in February we will have new forecasts. We will have also more certainty on the situation for 2023, and that's when a decision will be taken.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. Dr. Diane, that question regarding banks and telcos being the most profitable industries over the COVID-19 period. Yeah, those numbers were kind of staggering for most people. Now, can they do more in terms of supporting businesses and recovery? Too much is given, much is expected, I think.
So I think there's a bit of a perception because banks and telcos are the only that actually publish their financials. and these are regulated industries. We've not seen as other companies publishing their financials. But yeah, I think it's good to see that banks have weathered the crisis, the COVID crisis, and have remained profitable. Although ratio-wise, when you look at the returns on the equity invested, it was lower during the COVID period and is now coming back to pre-COVID levels. Telcos obviously have benefited from the transition to digital as companies were working more online, etc. I think they've seen a boom in their top lines. What we are doing, we can't speak as bank, we can't speak for telcos, but I think a sound financial system is also sort of a guarantee that these hardships are going to be weathered or alleviated. You've seen that most banks have not passed on yet the cost of funding to clients. Yet some clients have been able to increase their prices, but we've been prudent and supportive because we still believe we're in a recovery period and it's not the right time to increase rates. So this is what we're doing. And the other thing, as I said earlier, is that we've been able to allocate more financing to sectors like the energy sector, the oil sector, because we don't want people to queue for hours at the pump to get to fuel their cars. This is something that all banks have been working towards doing. And we want to be, that sector that will support the private sector, a financial sector that will support the private sector to weather the crisis and to make sure that the hardships are as much as possible alleviated as we all hope to full recovery and to inflation numbers that are below 10%, as the Deputy Governor was saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Diane Karsis. We have two questions that are going to come in from Harmless and then Fortune. And just remind our listeners that today's conversation is on the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on Rwanda's financial sector. Also, we're at the back end of the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the sector. Our speakers today, the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Rwanda, Honorable Soraya. We also have the Rwanda Bankers Association Vice Chairperson, Dr. Diane Karusisi, and Mr. Ferdinand Murezi, who is the Director of Financial Sector Stability Monitoring at the National Bank of Rwanda. You have any questions, please use the hashtag Twitter Spaces with NBR, or you can ask for the microphone, far better, and you could ask your question directly to any of our panelists. Harmless.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate this conversation. It's it's one way that the public can get informed about some things that are happening within or outside of the country to help people within the country. My question that I asked before was about transfers being on a higher rate compared to other countries in East Africa. But then my only worry is that if you look at the transfers, in Kenya, if you want to send money to Kenya, it's so free. Because I assume that the assumption is when someone is sending money to within the country, that money can be used as a profit. I mean, as a capital to start business. So maybe what the minister, the deputy governor just explained to me, my question was, don't you think that making those prices very high, the cost very high compared to other countries within East Africa, is discouraging flow of capital from diaspora, because you want the diaspora to help, but you're not making it that easy compared to other countries in the East Africa. And then the other question that I want to ask before I leave, I wanted to ask, there are some statistics about food inflation that have been put out by the World Bank. I just put the picture. In the comment. And my question is, if you look at the list of the top 10 countries, Rwanda is on the list, but there is no any other East African country that is on the list. So it would be easy to say we've been hit by the Ukraine and Russia war. But my question is, why is Rwanda the one that was hit the most if you compare to other countries? And what's the plan? Or are those statistics true, or are they wrong? Or maybe what are the real statistics if you don't think those are the right ones? Thank you.
Quite the packed questions there, Harmless. Thank you for joining us and thank you for making the time to be part of this conversation. Fortune, that's 995 at Tatenda Mboneka. Jani, your question, please.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity. I wanted to know. I wanted to know on the on the position of the central bank in terms of plastic money as an alternative to cash.
Thank you, Tatenda. Interesting question there. I think we will come back to that question last. I believe, Mr. Fadnamrezi, you could help us with that last question in regards to Rwanda Central Bank's position when it comes to plastic money. Interesting. As a replacement for cash. Going to Harmless's questions, I think we'll start with a question regarding those World Bank statistics around inflation. I believe the statistics, and Harmless, feel free to correct us if we are wrong. I believe the numbers you are talking about are the ones where Rwanda is in position number 8, and there's a 41% hit in regards to inflation. What can be done to curb that inflation? Deputy Governor, over to you.
Thanks for the questions. Probably maybe to go back first to the question on the pricing that he, Harmless, came back to. True, the fact that, having higher transfer prices might impact, the capital flows in the country. But I think the cost of transactions or the cost of transfers is only one factor that an investor look at. So as a country, I think, one, the fact that we've built and had, comprehensive reforms to make sure that people can do business easily in the country, that they have a stable, reliable regulatory environment, that we've put in place different incentives to attract investments in the sectors that are strategic to the country, as well as really the ease of doing business is, I think, all the factors that one would consider to look at inflows of investment in the country. But I do agree that wherever we still have bottlenecks, and the price of transfers might be one of them, this is something that central bank looks at with other stakeholders, but central bank will not impose pricing, but what we do is to make sure that we create a competitive environment, that also our financial sector inspires confidence and trust, and the stability and soundness of it does. On the question on inflation, I think on the statistic on food inflation, I think as a central bank we have stated the causes of our inflation. There's imported inflation that, yes, is still very high, but also food inflation, especially when we look at, the effects of climate change and the weathers. The fact that at the beginning of the year we didn't have enough rain. Now in this season A, we have rains, but that are not probably as, in the months that they used to be. But those are challenges that I think as a country we're going to be having, and you've seen different measures that the government has taken to make sure that we are at the forefront of fighting climate change, or at least having mitigation measures. And secondly, as well, government has made sure that the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on the prices of inputs, being fertilizers in this instance, that there are subsidies in place to make sure that we really minimize the impact on agricultural production. So we're hoping that with those interventions, we will see, in the next year, an impact on agricultural production, and then drive down inflation. But also there's probably a caveat on those statistics that are published by World Bank. The fact that, yes, Rwanda ranks in the countries where food inflation is high is also due to the fact that when you look at when those statistics are taken per country, some countries may only provide their statistics as of May or June. Ours are always, monthly and on time. So depending on the season of agriculture, and the timing of your statistics, we might see that ranking would change. Nevertheless, we take our own, numbers, and I think the fact that they are double digit is worrying enough without even looking at any rankings. And as a country, what we need to do is really make sure that food inflation that is related to our own agricultural production is brought down. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. Mr. Ferdinand Murezi, there was that question regarding the position of plastic as a replacement to cash. I think I also saw the Fonera CEO, Teddy Mugabo, as part of this conversation earlier. I don't think should be very happy with more plastic on the market. Ferdinand, what's the central bank position?
Yeah, thank you very much, Arnaud. I will try to answer the question. Probably if my colleague Karamuka, who is the director in charge of the payment system, is on the call, we supplement. But I don't know how Mugabo defined the plastic money. But if I can use my own definition, this is the usage of cards in the payment system platform. So generally, we as the central bank, we encourage people to use cards for in the payment system. This is part of our cashless journey because cards are more convenient and the security with the card are also guaranteed. I know banks are also doing what they can to ensure that many people uses cards in the payment system. And even if you can look at our figures in the recent report that we published, you find that the usage of the point of sales, those are using cards, have been steadily increasing during this period, and even in the COVID period. So, usage of cards is something that we encourage in addition to cash. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ferdinand Tatenda. Your question has been answered. And if you have any more questions, please don't forget to use that hashtag Twitter Spaces with NBR. A reminder, our conversation today is on the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war on Rwanda's financial sector. And unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end, and we're coming to the end of this conversation. So we'll take about two more questions before we wrap up this conversation. One question, which will go to Dr. Diane Karosisi. And Dr. Diane, you're being quoted here as saying this decade would be affected by crisis after crisis. Is there light at the end of this tunnel?
Thank you, Arnold. Of course, I think there's always light, and we just have to learn to be more resilient as an industry, but also as a country. And I think there are a number of initiatives that are being implemented to make our country and our industry more resilient, because crisis will continue to happen. Everyone talks about the geopolitical sort of wars that are underpinning the Ukraine-Russia war. We don't know what the impacts will be on us, so we just need to build resilience to make sure we are not as affected. And I believe it's possible. I think if we continue investing in mitigation and we improve agricultural productivity, I think being food, ensuring food security, energy security is going to give us some leeway in terms of preventing and weathering the future crisis. So there will be crisis, but we need to continue building resilience, and I believe we are all doing that already. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Diane. I want to throw that question to actually each of our panelists. on where they hope that light at the end of the tunnel will come from. And I'll start with Mr. Ferdinand Murezi. Where will the light come from?
Hello?
We can hear you loud and clear. Ferdinand,
Yes, no, I don't think I captured your question.
The question that was thrown to Dr. Diane Karusisi regarding if there will be light at the end of the tunnel with the current inflation pressures and effects and spillovers from the Russia-Ukraine war. If there is to be any form of light, where do you think it will come from?
Yeah, as I explained earlier, the risks or the vulnerabilities to the financial sector comes from the disruption of the global supply chain, the tightening of the financial markets, all these having a negative impact on the international trade, but also affecting our domestic trade. So, as an importing country, we rely much on the costing of the international trade. So domestically, the cost of production also, it increases due to all those factors and cost of finance and cost of inputs also putting pressures on income of household and companies, many of which are the customers of financial institutions. So I may say the war in Ukraine has no direct impact on our financial sector stability because our financial market is not directly linked to the warring parties. So the impact is mainly coming through and direct impact hitting first of all in the real sector in the economy, then coming through transmitting to the financial sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Ferdinand. Deputy Governor, where is the light going to come from at the end of this tunnel?
Thank you, Arnold. I think we shouldn't paint a gloomy picture yet. We've seen as a country that even through a pandemic that had been unprecedented, we managed to come out of it and actually, successfully, I would say, went through it. It was difficult, but I think there are three things probably that I would come to in terms of the optimism I have that even this crisis not only will end, but we will go through it successfully. The stability, that is one. The vision, not only at the top leadership of the country, but also when we look at how every sector in the country is really aligned to that vision and has confidence on the governance, the direction of the country, and the fact that the resilience of our people, has always carried us through. And when we come to the financial sector, it's no different. It's being led by Rwandans. Rwandans are the ones employed. And it's true that probably we will have to build more skill sets to be able to tackle this crisis and also continue to promote what we've seen as, I think, a light in the midst of being the COVID-19 pandemic, but also this geopolitical crisis, is the use of digital and how we can help solve some of the pressing issues that we see. And probably I was linking this to the last question that even Ferdinand touched upon. I don't think as a country we would want to even use plastic money when we are pushing for digital, but also when we're trying to build a green economy. So there's alternatives that are there, reliable, and really I think through innovation, through use of digital financial services, and continuing really collaborating across the board, being from the regulators, the financial industry, the government, and most importantly, the citizens, so that I understand what the impact on their everyday life is, but what we're doing as an ecosystem to support households and corporates. That will be very important to really continue to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but to get at the end of the tunnel very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor. Unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end, but it's a season of giving, so the central bank will give you another Twitter space before the year ends. So look out for that. The hashtag is always is Twitter Spaces with NBR. I want to thank the panel of experts that have helped us break down today's conversation on the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war on Rwanda's financial sector, starting with the Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda, Honorable Soraya Hakuzi Adebie. The Vice Chairperson, yes, she's wearing another hat today, of the Rwanda Bankers Association, Dr. Diane Karusisi, and the Director of Financial Sector Stability Monitoring at the National Bank of Rwanda, Mr. Fadina Morezi. Now, if you have any more questions, suggestions, always send us messages. We also want to thank the team, the communications team at the Central Bank, for always making sure that they update us with the latest information from the Central Bank. And most importantly, to you, the audience, for making the time to be with us this evening. Have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.